Hello and welcome to Max Realism. Today we are playing automation, and we're going to be making a full-size 1970s American station wagon and do it as realistically as possible. Some of the real-life examples of these would be the Chrysler Town & Country and the Oldsmobile Custom Cruiser. The Karen of 1974 would not be driving a Traverse or a Tahoe. She would instead be driving the Ford Country Squire. And we're going to make that sort of car today, though we won't recreate something perfectly. Naturally, the first step is to go back to the 70s and pick the absolute largest body possible, at least in a station wagon. This body in particular is based on a Chrysler, but it'll work perfectly for our purposes. Engineering is very conventional. You'd have a steel ladder frame, though Chrysler did have unibody, with galvanization representing the burgeoning art form of rust proofing. You'll have a longitudinal engine, of course, front independent coil sprung suspension, and a rear live axle with leaf springs. Though some sedans had coils, leaf springs were used in station wagons for interior space, towing capacity, and load. We're going to call this the Milwaukee engine because location names are an easy cop-out. This is going to be a large pushrod cast iron V8. These cars could have anywhere from about 300 cubic inches to 460. We're going to pick around 400, which was the normal or sometimes even the base engine size for these. And it's not particularly impressive otherwise. We're going to have triple cast internals because it won't reach the required torque or revs to really stress it. Now, this is a method of mine that is not necessarily realistic, but achieves sort of realistic results. And that is to set very low compression, very mild cam profile, and then when you get to the fuel, setting a very lean fuel mixture. This is not realistic because these cars would usually have somewhat rich fuel mixtures and still fairly high compression. But what this does is it gives you the fuel economy and the horsepower, or lack thereof, you really should be aiming for. Now, to talk to everything else I'm rushing through here, it's going to have a single 4-barrel carburetor, and because more than one carb is a pain in the ass to tune, but 2 barrels is not really enough to support this large of an engine to even have the sort of power we're aiming for. Now, in automation, there's always numerous forms of fine-tuning. This is always going to be a quiet car, so we'll put a double reverse flow and a single exhaust on it. And then we have to use all of our tools at our disposal. That includes the compression, the cam profile, even the fuel mixture, ignition timing, and of course the exhaust size to try and give us the required torque and horsepower targets. Horsepower at 180 was about spot on, but I could not quite reach the torque target of north of 300 foot-pounds. But it sounds pretty sweet. Beyond that, we slap on some pretty colors, usually red or blue, and then we move on to the detailed engineering. Now, you want to have a rear-wheel drive with a 3-speed automatic, top speed somewhere in the low 100s and spacing in the middle. Open diffs, you could have cross-ply or radial tires. Cross-ply was standard on GM, radial on other brands. Tires should be medium compound, not quite hard and long life. You must stick with 15-inch wheels, but the diameter and ratio is sort of up to your imagination. Beyond that, I put these about as wide as practical. Front disc, rear drum brakes, no rear discs yet on anything but the most luxurious of cars at this time. And then to help balance that out, you should bias the brakes towards the rear. While we sadly can't replicate the 10-passenger seating of certain Fords and Mercurys, we are going to put in 9 premium seats alongside a decent 8-track player. A case could be made for front buckets. Power steering is a must, and these cars would have the prerequisite seatbelts. For the suspension, stick with progressive springs, either gas or twin tube shocks, and tune the suspension to be mostly comfort biased but very low, and try and leave off the rear sway bar. It should safely understeer, but you should be able to do that with just the front camber and sway bar.
As your tools improve, so do your standards.
Now, spending a good amount of time on styling is the key to making any sort of realistic build, but I don't expect you to spend quite as much as me. I spent upwards of 8 hours on this car in particular, so I can't hope to get it all summarized in a decent amount of time. I'm just showing you the highlights, such as now where I'm putting in the modification of wood paneling surrounded by tan leather bumper bars to create the appearance of wood paneling, and then using 3D door handles to fit in. 3D fixtures have really revolutionized automation. They're a recent update at this point. You'll see me use them a lot in the front end as I'm working on now. As you see, the turn signals are just sort of floating in space as 3D fixtures, so I'm pretty much going to have to totally manually create bladed fenders, as most of these cars would have. Headlights at this point could be covered, could not quite yet be rectangular, but quad, round, exposed would be sort of the norm. And I'm using bumper bars for essentially everything that isn't light to try and make these bladed fenders. So this is going to have prominent fenders with turn signals, and then a fairly prominent grille with a domed hood going over the rest of it. It's going to end up with a sort of generic appearance, but vaguely regal nonetheless. And as you can see, you want to make a style cohesive. You got to look at all of the cars that you're inspired by and take a little bit from everything. And then you also need to make sure things work with each other. Don't necessarily take a turn signal from this car and a headlight from this car, because it'll look a little too disjointed. So, what I try and do here, even though it is sort of a mishmash of styling cues, I'm trying to get things to at least line up so they look like they're working with each other. So as I move on to the bumper, the key to any 1970s car is an obnoxiously prominent bumper to meet the 5-mile-an-hour safety regulations. So what I'm doing is that I'm creating sort of the rim of the bumper projecting outwards first with chrome, and creating the underbelly, and then what helps make it really convincing is that it is not solid metal all the way back to the body. There was painted bodywork between the chrome and the body, the part that would actually bend. So that helps make it a little more convincing. And everything I'm doing for the front, I am also doing for the back. Same thing. I used big standard grille fixtures to fill in that hole that I had created. They were 3D placed, so I needed to use the hole to cut so they would not go through the bodywork. And then I have to be creative in how I'm using things to reach the gap from the square fixtures for the grille up to the sort of curved hood bulge fixture. You don't always necessarily have to be perfect. Even if things line up fairly well, it might be difficult to see or not see in automation photos, and it'll definitely be difficult to see in Beam unless you get up really close. And then I started some of my name work, and at this point I decided to name it the Earl Ponderosa. Ponderosa, of course, being sort of a reference to Ponderosa Pines, but also one could describe this car as having ponderous driving behavior and handling. And of course, a prerequisite for any of this sort of car is a prominent hood ornament. I'm using multiple fixtures there to create it. So if you want to do an interior like you see here, you have to implement either a leather or a cloth fixture somewhere else in the car. In this case, I'm using the color of the vinyl roof to put in just miscellaneous brown 3D pieces to cover up some of the gaps in the chassis. I later use a standard dash piece and standard seats to sort of fill it in. It's nothing more than using the fixtures in the 3D manner well. And to help suit the vinyl roof, I covered up the pillars. I thought it made it look better if they were body color. A roof rack is a prerequisite to most of these sort of station wagons too. A good roof rack, you can use the standard fixtures for the side rails and then use bumper bars for the center. I decided to go a little above and beyond. A lot of these cars had sort of an interesting fixture in that they had some sort of fin to blow air across the back window, since they hadn't quite yet decided to put rear window wipers. So I made that, and then I also added on the fact that a lot of them were wood grain, so I used the same fixtures fixtures from the side of the car to cover them up with wood grain. And I think I didn't think it was going to translate well into Beam, but it actually surprisingly did. Now, don't be afraid to continuously revise your designs. I had a couple different ideas for taillights. In this case, I ended up deciding to surround them with bumper bars and actually not use a single fixture. It's very easy to be tempted to use one fixture or just some standard fixtures, but using chrome bars, I made a surround, and then I filled it in with just one of the patch tools to change the color of the backing, and then I put what were sort of traditional light fixtures on top of that. So it's a small detail, and you could create something vaguely similar to this using a lot less fixtures, but I felt this was a lot closer to my vision. And then just to carry over the thought of having some design cohesion, I tried to make sure that the lights, its edges lined up with the lines from the wood paneling on both the rear and the side of the car. Make sure you have reverse lights and stop lights and turn signals. So I think we ended up with a pretty successful design stylistically, but let's see how the engineering has turned out in Beam.
Lady on fire, bodies everywhere,
and explosions
is hanging from the trees. This accident is really cool.
So where else to start but then the station wagon's natural habitat, the American suburb. As so far as this car drives, you have the double-edged sword of making a realistic car in that it's almost always going to be able to drive and not be a total mess in Beam, but it's usually not going to be all that fun unless it's a particularly unusual and or sports car. It's not fast and it understeers a lot. Beep beep, Timmy. Picking you up from school, get the hell in. Alright, this is boring, let's try something else. Alright, well, let's throw it around in a few experiments here. One part of having a lot of fixtures in your car is that the moment you hit absolutely anything, it is going to instantly fall apart. We might be able to go over some of these small bumps. There we go, we see that suspension really working. I kind of have my doubts about how comfortable this car would be. Alright, let's see if we can get her around. No. Alright. I'm not going to stop until I can make this. Or better. Come on. Come on. Come on. Oh, we're topping out. This car really came out like that counts. I'm going with it. Now, back to something that this car should actually be pretty good at is towing. Back before every American family had a pickup truck, big sedans and big station wagons were used to tow things like this trailer. And this actually does pretty well at it. It's certainly not fast and it doesn't stop fast either. But it is actually pretty stable handling. Before, you couldn't get it to swing out at all, and now, while it will swing out, it is eminently controllable. So, there's that. Back to things this car won't be good at. We're going to throw this through the Endurodrome, which apparently has some missing fixtures. This is really meant for off-road vehicles and or other tough trucks. So I don't expect this to last particularly long between its real low ride and serious amount of fixtures. As you can see, we've already lost half of them along the way. But it's and I'm not a very good driver either. I should preface that. I'm doing everything here with a controller, and I am not an experienced racing driver. An experienced racing game driver, that is. And this is still actually doing surprisingly well. It went a lot farther than I thought. I should say that. It eventually failed at the ocean of no texture. So it's about time we put it through its paces in a circuit of the automation test track, but rather than continue to regale you with my color commentary, why don't we just liven up the music a little bit? wasn't that oh so very exciting? 136. We have no frame of reference for that, since this is indeed the first car I've made in a serious effort for this channel. But that's a good segue into new plans. I would love if everybody could like and comment and leave their suggestions and questions. So far, my best idea for a next video is to make a 1980s German executive car. But I look forward to seeing what you have to say. Of course, I won't leave you hanging without the ultimate in final destruction by taking this off a ski jump. Let the record reflect that it made it 250 yards, stuck the landing, but could not stop nor reverse fast enough to avoid a watery grave. I hope everybody enjoyed this, and thanks for watching.